Given the bloody nature of the war, some might say it was anything but civil, especially when it came to the guerrilla fighters who used the war not to seek freedom, but as an excuse to start killing their neighbors and others who had wronged them at some point, were those men who took advantage of the fighting to rob people, destroy property, and assault women. As honest and decent as many soldiers on the front lines undoubtedly were, there were some soldiers who were unscrupulous villains, practically inhuman monsters. But amid all the strange and bloody stories that emerged from the war between the states, there was something else that men on both sides, Confederate and Union, encountered in the wooded regions where many of their battles took place. Reading through the letters and memoirs of Civil War soldiers, mentions were rarely made about inhuman creatures wandering the battlefields. And no, these men were not referring to guerrilla fighters, but guerrilla is a word that's not so far from the truth. They reported huge, humanoid creatures who wore no uniform except for an excessive amount of body hair, leading a reclusive life deep within the forests and remote caves of the Appalachian Mountains. The soldiers who met these creatures often called them wild men, beastmen, or simply monsters, creatures with very large feet. These are stories of cryptid encounters from the American Civil War. The mist that hangs before you offers you a choice to either pass through it or to escape. Beyond it are stories that defy explanation and fly in the face of what we know to be real. It is a void of both reality and impossibility, of both fact and superstition. You alone are free to discern what to believe as you pass through what we call a fog of war. How do you think the regiments are holding up in this cold? The boys from the South are probably wishing they were back home, don't you think? Gold or no gold, it doesn't seem to stop him from barking at us. Robertson was saying we might be moving out soon, Bayville, or some other place. You hear about that? No, but that's probably what the supply train's here for. I tell you, it'd be even better if we could make use of one of them. Whoa, something's happening. Stay where you are. It could be rebels, trying to lure us away from the supply train. Did I hear that right? What's that? A beastman. In early 1863, the Civil War was not going well for the Northern Union. The war was about to enter its second year, and any hope the federal government had for a quick victory over the South had vanished. Things had started out well for the Union in early 1862. They won a number of victories in the West and launched the Peninsula Campaign, which aimed to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. But the campaign ended in a total failure, and the death toll on both sides was staggering. The battles of Antietam and Fredericksburg in the fall and winter of 1862 resulted in even higher casualties, the largest ever seen on American soil. And the situation was only going to get worse. At the heart of all this fighting was the small town of Harper's Ferry, Virginia, located right on the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers. Harper's Ferry was a vital railroad junction and the site of the U.S. Federal Armory. By the war's end, the town had seen dozens of battles and was recaptured by the opposing sides at least 8 times. At the time our story takes place, in February of 1863, Harper's Ferry was in the hands of the Union Army, specifically the 67th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry Regiment. One of the soldiers in the unit was a young private by the name of James Moore. While occupying the town on a cold winter night, Moore and another soldier named Ramsey found themselves standing late watch. The pair had been ordered to stand guard over a supply train that was soon to be leaving for the front. In short, it was an uneventful night. The only sound was a frigid winter breeze coming off the river and howling over the high cliffs surrounding the town. The 2 soldiers patrolled along the silent railroad, trying their best to keep warm, but things soon took a strange turn. Private Moore would later recount the events of that night in a letter to his wife dated February 26, 1863. Ramsey and myself were detailed to watch the company stores along the railroad. It was very cold. The night was quiet. The boys began to make a fuss in the garrison. Some were shouting that a beastman was afoot. There was a rifle fire in the direction of the river. We continued our duty while the shouting and gunfire continued. The corporal questioned the company witnesses. I was told the devil had attacked the food stores after scaling the wall. He was covered in thick layers of dark hair, perhaps 8 feet from head to toe. This letter, written by Private James Moore, is said to have first appeared in the late 1990s, when it was sold at an auction as part of a larger collection of old personal writings and correspondence. The few lines concerning the beastman seen by his fellow soldiers were obviously just fragments of a longer account. In an article published on a Civil War news website, journalist Aaron Stoyak explained what happened next. The letter was sold in 1999 to a now unknown buyer, but the auction company had transcribed some of the old letters to include in their brochures. One of the sales appraisers, intrigued by the strange story, had kept one of these brochures and later contacted the author of a cryptid website relating the soldier's encounter. Unfortunately, the full account was lost when the appraiser's house caught fire in 2005 and the auction brochure was destroyed. While researching Moore's account, I couldn't help but notice that Harper's Ferry is located directly on the Appalachian Trail, which is no stranger to unexplained paranormal phenomena. This includes multiple sightings of the creature called Sasquatch in the Appalachian Trail links to the infamous Missing 411. So it makes sense that an encounter of this sort could have happened there if it was going to happen anywhere. When it comes to Sasquatch or Bigfoot, there are many native legends and other oral histories passed down through generations of families that predate the 1860 segundos. But despite his original letter being nowhere to be found, James Moore's account is considered by some to be one of the earliest documented Bigfoot encounters in the United States. And as it turns out, Private Moore wasn't the only Civil War soldier to write about beast men. And my apologies, sir. Is this a bad time? As good a time as any? What is it? A wire came in this morning from a Mr. George Anderson of Birmingham, Alabama, claiming to be a captain who fought under Bragg during the war. A rebel. Well, what does he want? Honestly, sir, it's best you read it for yourself. Have you ever heard the story of the wild man of Cumberland Mountain? Any idea what he's on about? No idea, sir? Well, reach out to him and ask for more details. Who knows? Might make for an interesting filler piece. This next story first appeared in the August 2nd, 1890 edition of the Pittsburgh Dispatch newspaper, submitted by a former Confederate officer named George Anderson, who served as a captain under General Braxton Bragg. Anderson's story begins in September of 1863. Before the Battle of Chickamauga, Confederate forces found themselves entrenched near the small towns of Bridgeport and Stevenson, just over the Alabama border. While Bragg prepared his forces for the upcoming battle, Captain Anderson's company was assigned to the rear. Garden found themselves posted in the Cumberland Mountains, overlooking the two towns. The Union troops that had chased them out of Tennessee weren't far behind, but something far worse than Yankees was waiting for them on that mountain. At this time, my company numbered only 60 men. Half of them were on duty at night, the other half during the day. The pickets were stationed about 50 yards apart, with several scouts assigned to watch for the enemy in our front. While placing my men on the picket line, I visited each post. Near the center of the line, a man was posted at the mouth of a narrow, dark ravine that led somewhere up into the mountains. The post was under a large oak tree, and at night, the place was so dark you could not see a man 10 feet away. The first night, we were on duty. Andrew Mason, one of the best and bravest men in my company, was on post under the large tree. When the pickets were relieved the next morning, Mason was gone. His gun was found lying on the ground near the post, and there were signs of a severe struggle, but Mason was nowhere to be found. His gun had not been discharged, and I thought that a small scouting party of the enemy had crept up on him, unawares, and ... This letter, written by a private James Moore, reportedly first appeared in the late 1990s when it was sold at auction as part of a larger collection of old personal writings and correspondence. The few lines regarding the man-beast seen by his fellow soldiers were evidently only fragments of a much longer written account. In an article he posted on the emerging Civil War website, journalist Aaron Stoyak explained what happened. The letter was sold in 1999 to a now unknown buyer, but the auction company had made transcripts of some of the old letters to put into their pamphlets. One of the auction appraisers, intrigued by the strange story, had kept one of these pamphlets and later contacted the author of a cryptid website to share the soldier's encounter. Unfortunately, the full account was lost when the appraiser's house caught fire in 2005 and the auction pamphlet was destroyed. While researching Moore's account, I couldn't help but to notice that Harper's Ferry is located directly on the Appalachian Trail, which is no stranger to unexplained paranormal phenomena. This includes multiple sightings of the creature called Sasquatch in the Appalachian Trail's connections to the infamous Missing 411. So, it reasons that an encounter of this kind could have happened there if it was going to happen anywhere. When it comes to Sasquatch or Bigfoot, There are many native legends and other oral stories passed down by generations of families that predate the 1860 segundos, but in spite of his original letter being unaccounted for, James Moore's account is considered by some to be one of the earliest documented Bigfoot encounters in the United States. And as it turns out, Private Moore wasn't the only Civil War soldier to write about. Man-beasts. I thought it's page 6. Come in. Apologies, sir. Is it a bad time? As good a time as any? What is it? A wire came through this morning from a Mr. George Anderson of Birmingham, Alabama. Claims he was a captain who fought under Bragg during the war. A rebel, huh? Well, what does he want? Honestly, sir, it's best if you read it yourself. Did you ever hear the story of the wild man of Cumberland Mountain? Do you have any idea what he's on about? Not a clue, sir. Well, get in touch and ask for more details. Who knows, could make for some interesting page filler. This next story first appeared in the August 2nd, 1890 edition of the Pittsburgh Dispatch newspaper. It was submitted by a former Confederate officer named George Anderson, who served as a captain under General Braxton Bragg. Anderson's story picks up in September of 1863. Just prior to the Battle of Chickamauga, Confederate forces would dig in near the small towns of Bridgeport and Stevenson, just over the Alabama state line. While Bragg readied his forces for the upcoming battle, Captain Anderson's outfit was assigned to the rear guard and found themselves posted up in the Cumberland Mountains, overlooking the two towns. The Union troops that had chased them out of Tennessee weren't far behind, but something far worse than the Yankees was waiting for them on that mountain. I had only 60 men in my company at that time. One half of them were on duty at night, the other half during the day. The pickets were placed almost 50 yards apart as a number of scouts were detailed to watch the enemy in front of us. In placing my men on the picket line, I visited each post. Near the center of the line, a man was stationed at the mouth of a narrow, dark L-looking ravine which led up somewhere into the mountains. The post was under a large oak tree, and at night the spot was so dark a man could not be seen 10 feet away. The first night we were on duty, Andrew Mason, one of the best and bravest men in my company, was at the post under the big tree. When the pickets were relieved the next morning, Mason was missing. His gun was found on the ground at the post, and there were signs of a desperate struggle, but Mason could not be found. His gun had not been discharged, and I thought a small scouting party of the enemy had crept upon him, unawares, and taken him prisoner. I ordered the scouts in front to keep a close watch for foraging or scouting parties of the enemy, and when the pickets were changed at sundown, I cautioned the man who took the post under the big oak to keep a careful lookout and not get captured. That night, some of the scouts came in and reported that there was not a blue coat within 10 miles of us. The second morning, the picket under the oak was gone. His gun was there, and again, there was evidence of a struggle. But outside of a circle of 20 feet, we could discover no footprints. With 2 soldiers now having vanished, some of the men were starting to feel a little bit unnerved. But the third soldier assigned to the post wasn't so icily frightened. His name was Brown, a man Anderson described as being a strapping young man and as brave as a lion. When his captain advised him to be extra alert on that night's watch, Brown was reported to have laughed off Anderson's warning. He puffed his chest and claimed that it would take an entire company to capture him alive. That night, Brown would disappear. Now, the third man to go missing. Initially, Anderson thought that these men were deserting their posts, but when a fourth man disappeared, this time one of Anderson's most loyal sergeants, he knew that something must be happening to them, and he wasn't the only one concerned. Some of his soldiers were bordering on hysterics, claiming that evil spirits were behind the strange disappearances. Anderson had to work quickly to get the situation under control. When night came, I placed the men there as usual, telling him I would have an extra guard around the place. Then, taking 10 picked men whose courage I could rely on, I stationed them at short intervals so as to completely surround the big oak tree where 5 of my men had been so mysteriously captured. My orders were for every man to remain perfectly quiet until he heard a struggle under the tree. Then all rushed to the relief of the man on the post. There was to be no shot fired if it could be avoided. I wanted to capture the mysterious enemy alive. I took a position inside my line of guards, and about 50 feet from the tree. I listened intently and soon heard plainly the rustling of the branches as though some wild animal was moving about in the tree. What in blue blazes is that? Sounds like it's up in the trees. Damn it. Get in there. It was probably 5 minutes after I first heard the rustling among the branches of the tree when some object fell to the ground with a thud. Instantly, there was a cry of pain or terror from the sentinel under the tree, and I shouted to my men to rush forward. As we closed in, we could only see 2 forms struggling as if for life. I ordered my men to seize both, and as quickly as possible, I made light. My picket was in the grasp of a giant. A man clothed in rags with long matted hair and beard had caught the soldier around the body and pinned his arms to the side. The strength of this strange being was that of a giant, and it was several minutes before my 10 men could completely overpower him. I built a fire, and we dragged him to the light, where he was securely bound. He lay there and glared at us like a wild beast, but uttered no sound. We had solved the mystery of the capture of our men, but now the question was how we would learn their fate. I asked him again and again what he had done with the men he caught, but received no answer. Then I tried to make him understand by signs what I wanted to know, but he only laughed a wild, unhuman-like laugh. We remained by the fire under the big oak with our prisoners securely bound until daylight. Then I promised him his liberty if he would tell what he had done with the men he had captured or guide us to his den. To both propositions, he made no reply. I saw the man was a maniac and decided to try a strategy to gain the information I wanted. Placing my men around him with fixed bayonets, I motioned him to go on, but he would not move. The wild man was over 6 feet high and would weigh probably 250 pounds. His hair and beard were long and unkempt, and his clothes were a mass of rags and tatters. I noticed an ugly-looking scar on the top of his head. Threats, persuasion, and force all failing to induce him to talk or lead us to his hiding place. I decided to try another plan. Telling my men to let the man go, I ordered them to shoulder arms, and we started back towards the camp. This scheme was successful. De moment. The wild man realized he was at liberty. He dashed off up the narrow ravine. I called on my men to follow me. It was all we could do to keep him in sight. So great was his speed. He evidently did not suspect that we would follow him, for he never once looked back. Up the narrow ravine, he led us on a lively chase for a mile or more. We had been climbing all the way and were near the summit of the Cumberland Mountains when the wild man turned aside from the ravine and started into a large cave. Then he looked back for the first time and saw us in pursuit. Estud. Still a moment, then turned and again set out towards the summit of the mountain. Ordering 2 of my men to remain and watch the cave, I pushed on with the others in pursuit of the wild man. He ran probably 300 yards to the edge of a high precipice. There he turned and, picking up several large stones, hurled them at us with great force. We dodged the stones and pressed on. Seeing escape cut off, the man turned and, uttering a wild, unearthly cry, leaped over the precipice. I shut my eyes as I saw him leap into space. We cautiously crawled up to the edge of the cliff, and looking down we could see the mangled body of the wild man lying on the rocks more than 100 feet below. We turned and retraced our steps to the cave. There we found our missing pick. The cave was the dwelling place of the wild man, and inside the 5 men of my company who had fallen into his hands were tied to stakes driven in the ground. They had not been harmed by their wild captor, but had been without food and water since their capture. Not one word had the wild man spoken to any of them, but from his manner and gestures, they were of the opinion that he was saving them for some fish. Torture, which his crazed brain would suggest. He had captured the first man by creeping upon him in the darkness. After that, his plan was to return to the spot during the night and, climbing the big oaks, conceal himself among the branches, where he would remain until the next night, and then drop on his victim from the tree. A few days later, I learned the story of the wild man of the mountains from a resident of that locality. His name was Bill Patton, and before the war he had lived in a small cabin upon the mountain and earned a scant livelihood by hunting and fishing. He was a Union man in sentiment and refused to join the Confederate Army. One day he was captured by a squad of home guards while he was selling some game in Bridgeport, and they started with him to the nearest conscripting office. On the way, he escaped from his captives after a desperate struggle in which he received a terrible cut on the head with a saber. He recovered from the wound, but it left him a maniac. He took to the mountain again and lived in caves, subsisting on the game he could kill. In his madness, he had probably planned a terrible revenge for the wound which destroyed his reason. This wild man of Cumberland Mountain obviously wasn't a Bigfoot encounter, so George Anderson's story could provide a plausible explanation for what soldiers were seeing out in the wilderness. The Appalachian region was possibly full of mountain hermits who wanted to avoid the war and became a bit feral, living off the land away from human civilization. The concept of wild men or mountain men wasn't unheard of in 19th century America. As the country became increasingly more industrialized, more and more men chose to abandon the modern world and all the problems that came with it, adopting a much more rugged lifestyle. In one recorded instance in 1871, a wild man was captured by a posse of citizens from Morgantown, West Virginia. He was described as half man and half beast, covered in rags with long, bushy hair, giving him the appearance of a gorilla more than a human being. This wild man was apparently an Irish immigrant named Thomas Foley, who had lived in Connecticut 4 years before disappearing into the West Virginia wilderness, while racial divisions in the 1860s and 7 South are well known. What is probably less known is the severe discrimination of the Irish and other European immigrants in America. Around this time, many Irish were viewed with disdain, enduring frequent mockery and outright persecution, including lynchings and other murders. They were often depicted as drunken, slovenly, and ape-like. Phrase, "No Irish need apply," was commonly seen in job advertisements and shop windows. After fighting in the Civil War and aiding the Union victory, hatred for the Irish began to soften. But it's possible that this discrimination is also what drove Foley away from people. The people of West Virginia seemed more hospitable, though, as the residents of Morgantown took pity on Foley and attempted to reintroduce him back to society. They even bought him a whole new set of clothes as a welcoming gift. But as they say, you can take a man out of the woods, but you can't take the woods out of a man. The last time anyone saw Thomas Foley, he had stripped off his new clothes and was running out of Morgantown on foot towards the woods, stark naked. The wildman phenomenon would be an easy explanation for these and other reports of Bigfoot creatures, but it doesn't seem to account for what the following soldier witnessed after being wounded on the battlefield. Oh, God. Oh. 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 My legs. I can't move. Oh. Oh. Help somebody. Oh. Please. I can't move. Oh. Water. Oh. Please. Oh, but Eder, please. Please help me. Please. Ms. Room Naruma stories. This final story was first submitted to the Dixie Cryptid podcast and aired in 2018 in an episode titled A Civil War Encounter. The host, Cameron Buckner, stated that the account was another one found in a letter written by a Civil War veteran around 30 years after the war in 1895. The letter, now damaged by a century of aging, was carefully shown to Cameron by a local historian and writer. The historian told Cameron that he would prefer to keep the soldier's name off the record, so we'll just refer to him as Abraham, or Abe for short. Abi's story begins on the day he rode to Memphis, Tennessee, to enlist in the Confederate Army. Falling in with a cavalry unit led by Nathan Bedford Forrest, the man credited with starting the Ku Klux Klan group, Abe would eventually find himself fighting in the Battle of Bryce's Crossroads on June 10, 1864. While taking cover behind a tree, a canister round exploded against its trunk, sending splinters and shrapnel into Will's right arm and legs. The blast hurled him to the ground, knocking him unconscious. When Abe came 2 hours later, the battle was over and the sun had set. The battlefield was now eerily quiet, and Abe found himself all alone in the desolate landscape of shattered trees and dead bodies. Beatty's point, Abe had lost a lot of blood and was fighting the overwhelming fatigue taking hold of him. But just when he thought he was done for, help arrived. Although it clearly wasn't the kind he was expecting, I laid back and wondered if anyone would find me. I would soon realize that I was on my own. I felt tired again, and I was fighting the sleep that was about to again overtake me when I heard footsteps. Heavy footsteps. I rolled my head over to see who would be my rescuer, and I saw two tree-trunk-thick legs standing next to me. I was so weak that it did not matter to me. Maybe I was hallucinating. Then the figure bent down as if to look at me. I heard a low guttural noise. A purr, if you will. It was not human. I fought sleep off with all my might. It was overtaking me again. Then there were two of the furry figures standing at my feet. They were communicating in some language that I did not understand. The largest of the two leaned over again and wrapped its huge hand around my right leg and pulled. I resounded with a scream. The pain was too much to bear. The second beast took my other leg, and they began to drag me away from the tree and through the leaves and the green undergrowth. The pain was getting worse, and I began to scream at them, but they just kept walking. Then they let go. One dropped out of view in front of me, and I lifted my head to see what was next. Another hand wrapped around my shin, and I was being dragged over the bank into a deep creek. I felt myself being lifted into the air and then swung over the shoulder of the beast. Then I lost consciousness. When I awoke, I was in darkness. It was cold. I did not remember it being cold. We had been beaten by heat all day and night, but now I was cool. I blinked my eyes and waited for them to adjust to the darkness. I noticed a small flicker of light in the distance. The light grew brighter, and I could see a fire had been made. I had been rescued, and I was in the hands of my countrymen. A sigh of relief exited my chest. I began to feel my legs again, and the trousers that had been wet were now dry. My bleeding had stopped, and I could move my arms, but not my legs. Then a figure began to move towards me with a torch in their hand. My horror returned when I saw that it was one of the creatures that had dragged me from the battlefield. I could not fight. I had no weapon, and I was at the mercy of a group of monsters, despite their terrifying appearance. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a truly remarkable account that blurs the lines between history, folklore, and the unknown. It's the story of a soldier named Abe, left for dead on a battlefield, only to be saved by creatures straight out of legend. Abe was gravely wounded, caught in the crossfire of cannon blasts. As he lay bleeding and helpless, he was dragged from the carnage not by fellow soldiers, but by something else entirely. Towering, hairy figures. He initially thought them to be monsters, but their actions spoke a different language. They weren't there to harm him. They were there to help. They took him to a hidden, underground den. For weeks, these creatures cared for him. They used chewed vegetation as a poultice to fight the infection in his wounds and brought him fresh water and meat. Abe even noted their intelligence, recalling how one of them used powdered lime to mask the scent of his urine, likely to protect them all from predators. These weren't just beasts. They were compassionate, intelligent beings. Abe observed their family life from his resting place. He wrote, "Often I would see the young ones in the firelight dancing and playing, but the adults would never allow them close to me." One evening, however, a young one, full of curiosity, broke the rule. It approached him, a smile on its face. Abe was stunned. He hadn't known they could smile. The little one reached out, gently touched his hair, and then scurried back to its family. It was a brief, touching moment of connection that lifted Abe's spirits immensely. Slowly, with their constant care, Abe regained his strength. The day he could finally stand and walk on his own, he knew it was time to leave. As he emerged into the daylight for the first time in weeks, he turned to say goodbye. The large female, the one who had first dragged him to safety, walked up to him. She placed a massive hand on his head in a gentle gesture, and with her other hand, she returned his hat, which he thought he'd lost forever in the chaos of battle. Moved, Abe held her hand for a moment, looked into her dark eyes and said, "Thank you." He felt she understood his gratitude. The creatures then parted, creating a path for him into the woods. One pointed straight ahead, showing him the way. He walked, and when he looked back, they were gone. But as he continued his journey, he heard a loud, mournful howl echo from the direction of their den, a final, poignant farewell. Years later, as an old man, Abe returned to that place. The battlefield was still littered with rusted remnants of the war. a somber reminder of the past. He searched for the creature's den, but it was gone. The landscape changed by time. He waited for an hour, hoping to catch a glimpse of his saviors, but only silence answered. As he mounted his horse to leave, filled with gratitude, he heard it one last time along. Loud howl from across the creek. He didn't look back. This incredible story, whether you view it as a historical account or a tall tale, really makes you think. It echoes other wild man legends and even brings to mind classic survival stories like Hatchet by Gary Paulson. Imagine Brian, the protagonist from Hatchet, not only surviving the Canadian wilderness, but also encountering a Bigfoot. Now that would have been a story. What do you all think? Could a creature like this exist? The consistency of sightings and stories across different cultures is hard to ignore. Even the renowned primatologist Jane Goodall believed it was a real possibility. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me for this incredible story. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. Your support means the world and helps us continue to explore these fascinating topics. A huge thank you to our Patreon and YouTube channel members for your amazing support. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you in the next episode.